wow, like that's what you experienced. Like we're actually at a time where we need to spiritually mature and understand that the world is so much more than we've been told, and that the afterlife is not separate from this life. It is one big overlapping realm. Like the earth is a realm. And everything has different densities and frequencies. And I guess from a near-death perspective, when you have that awareness already and you don't have to read it in a book or try to intellectualize it, you become fluid with that understanding. You become one with that creation itself. And so
in this podcast episode, we delve into the profound realms of duality and non-duality with three extraordinary guests, Mitch Presnick, Aimee, and David Maginley. This thought-provoking conversation explores the nature of reality, consciousness, and the spiritual journey that connects all of us. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Bump in the Road. Today, we have some terrific people together, and we're going to talk a little bit about duality and non-duality. Everyone, let's just introduce ourselves. I think people know who I am. Mitch.
I'm Mitch Presnick. I spent 30 years in China and recently moved back to the U.S., where I'm currently a visiting fellow at the Harvard Fairbank Center for Chinese Studies.
Sherry?
Hi, everyone. My name is Aimee. I am a public speaker. I am a philosopher. I'm a near-death experience survivor. 15 years ago, I died for over 90 minutes. And I talk a lot about both the medical recovery that I had to undergo, but I also talk about the fascinating and very profound experience of what it was like crossing over.
David.
Oh, I can't wait to hear Sherry. I want the whole thing about you. I'm David Maginley. I've been a chaplain in palliative and cancer care for 25 years. I'm a near-death experiencer as well. And I'm on the board of the International Association for Near-Death Studies. I have a private practice, and now I'm filling in at a church, a Lutheran church. I'm a Lutheran pastor for the rest of the year, where we will be exploring non-duality along with some other things.
Let's open with what is non-duality? Or better yet, let's open with what is duality? David.
Okay. Duality is the perception of reality that involves you as a distinct identity and objects, anything other than you. So it is the reality that everyone experiences in their daily life, and they take it as normal. Contrasted with non-duality, which is the understanding that the underlying nature of consciousness, of reality, is consciousness, and everything emanates from and is sustained by that consciousness. And so they appear as apparent separate objects, but that is simply consciousness, you might say, veiled in many different forms of expression and creativity and manifestation. So it lands on the startling implication that existence has objects, but objects do not have existence.
Mitch?
So I always think about duality and non-duality in Taoist terms. I practice several aspects of Taoism. Of course, Taoism is always about the oneness. There's a one thing, and then there's a Tao that sort of guides everything, and that's non-duality, right? Oneness. Duality is the illusion that we're living in this separate world inside of this body encased in flesh, and we're looking out into a world that we're foreign from, that we came into rather than grew out of. And the idea of duality is like the core. It's the core question of existence, which is, how do we get through this illusion, get to the place where we're living in an objective reality? What non-duality promises. That's how I understand it.
Sherry.
I think just to add to that, when I think of duality, I think of this dual nature that we live in, of like opposites. So up and down, right and left. And it ends up being this foundational understanding of reality and our existence that we all abide by. And while those are very simple examples, it actually extends to all use of language, how we describe things, how we communicate. And I, for me as a near-death survivor, where I feel like this is the part that starts to become the most difficult to explain to people, is when you start getting into more complex areas of existence, where we tend to have conditioning and belief systems and lineages of how we see reality being passed down throughout the generations of how the world works. And this is where we can start, as a society, as a culture, as a world, start clashing on what we believe to be right or wrong about the world that we live in. And so this understanding of duality can, when utilized correctly and understood, can help us to actually communicate better and understand that even though, yes, the entire world is made of oneness, the way we experience reality is dualistic in nature. And when we can allow for nuance, I believe that that's where we can start to come together and be more accepting of differences of opinions, of lifestyles, of ways of being, in order to create that harmony that so many of us deeply desire in life.
You know, one of the things you touch on, Sherry, is that duality is a very human and experiential process. Hot, cold, happy, sad, whatever set of terms you want to think about. But when you move into non-duality, there is a recognition that everybody experiences these things in different ways. It might be isolation, it might be cold, whatever. But all of a sudden, you step outside of yourself and you see that greater connection and that greater oneness. And I think that's something that adds a spiritual layer to the dualistic experience we have here on this earth. And it adds a richness and a curiosity and a connection that might otherwise elude us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think at the core, as human beings, we want connection. We want love. We want, whether we're aware of it or not, we do long for that connection with the divine. But, to bring it out of the spiritual lens, as humans, we all desire connection, right? Like that's the core. It's a part of us. It's in our DNA. It's who we are. And I think in the daily hustle and bustle of life and belief systems and conditionings, we can easily forget that what we actually really truly want is connection. Because when you remember that, you are then willing to navigate those spaces in between our differences, right? Like that's what I consider to be the realm of nuance, right? So maybe you have a different belief system. Maybe David or Mitch has a different belief system on a certain topic than I do. But am I actually curious about diving into those spaces in between with the intention of connection? Or am I bringing to the table very rigid beliefs that end up actually disconnecting me from my fellow human?
Thoughts, you guys?
Well, Mitch, I'm curious what your insights on how the Tao, it flows. It's this universal, um, um, sublime foundation of being or energy or of reality. As soon as you speak of it, you're reducing it, and that's very much in something we forget in the Christian tradition. Is as soon as you speak of God, you're distorting it. You can't. The best place to land is silence and just to be. One of the classic prayers or texts is "Be still and know that I am God." And in a non-dual approach, it's nice to take that and then just repeat it by shortening it. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know. Be still. Be. And then you arrive at the ground where there is no ego or personal identity, right? You check that to the side. Does that resonate? Is that how it's expressed?
Yeah, so I grew up Jewish, and I'm not really practicing, but I do think there's a lot to be said for some of the values that I grew up with and practices that were, I think, helpful in life and family and business and everything. But I think that I've found that some of the Eastern philosophies, I don't necessarily call them religions. Buddhism is more of a philosophy to me. So there's no real conflict between Judaism, Western religions, and Buddhism. What I do think is true about Buddhism, Taoism that makes them unique is that they're already approaching from the point of view of there's the divinity within us to start. And then that is the core of the non-duality we're talking about here, is that it's a place that you exist, you've always existed. You're not having to redeem into something. You're already there. You're perfect as you are. And I think actually the way Western religion uses the word God is exactly what we're talking about when you strip away some of the limiting definitions and you just look at it, what we're talking about. You're talking about one's relationship with everything. And that is exactly what Taoism is about. And how do you get there? Well, I arrived there practically. I was looking I'm an entrepreneur. I founded a hotel chain in China. So I wanted to learn how to manage stress and I wanted to learn how to be more effective. And so I started meditating 30 years ago for practical reasons. And I was much more into TM than the spiritual aspects. But I started to notice that at least once every session that I would meditate, there would be a moment where I would lose myself. I would start to recognize that these thoughts that I was having weren't necessarily my thoughts; they were just thoughts, and these feelings that I was having, they weren't necessarily my feelings. A feeling of connection or disconnection that clearly seemed to correlate with how deep of a meditation I was finding myself in, and I started to notice those little glimmers of non-duality. Those were the things that really kind of helped me in business. They helped me to be more objective. They helped me to be less emotional, less ego-driven, less fear-driven, and everything good started coming when I started to practice Taoism. And I thought, wow, this is interesting. Applied philosophy is exactly what a person in my position is trying to do, because we'll never get there from the spiritual side. We'll never go, it would be great to be more enlightened. That's not what we're going to do. So, we're going to say, we've got all these problems and opportunities. What can I use to solve them? And then pulling this one off the shelf was powerful. And so like Taoism to this day is something that I practice more as a practical guide. But now I can see that the two sides are very much the same thing. We don't really have a business life and a personal life anymore. I used to think I had a separate life now I just have a life, and I'm expressing in different ways the same things, and I'm learning lessons from all aspects of life, using the same indicators. I'm grateful for the same challenges, whether they're personal or business, as long as as long as I can understand that there's a value, So this is the kind of way, I guess. I think all of this was informed by a lot of Taoist reading and a lot of Taoist practice. I think that's my long-winded answer to your question, David.
What a relief to find you don't need to believe everything you think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mitch, one of the things you say is really interesting is it's part of this movement towards non-dualism is the experience you have in meditation, in that you get these glimpses way outside yourself that are just connecting to something so much greater. It has nothing to do with your ego or anything like that. And all of a sudden, at least for me over time, I get all these glimpses. I got some of them flying. I get them meditating. And there's all these data points. And they make sense when you start to string them together. It's greater. It's connective. It's something that personally, I want to explore. I want to go there. I want to see and feel and learn more.
Yeah. The thing is about a meditation for me anyway is I know for a fact that the state I'm in before I meditate doesn't necessarily lend itself to understanding why it's so important that I meditate, right? In that state where I'm just in my conscious mind, my ego self, I'm in a very dualistic mindset at that moment. I'm just this ego prosecuting my plans in that moment. But one of those plans is to make sure that I'm not too tied to my emotions. So now I'm getting myself into a meditation using a dualistic mindset, but then I'm very quickly reminded, oh yeah, that's why I did this. And then and then it loops back around. And then so much of it is that relationship. I don't know if it's dualistic, non-dualistic relationship we have with ourselves, or if it's more of a conscious, subconscious, but one or the other is sort of like, I wish I could stay in my non-dualistic state, and I could probably be really effective in business if I did that. But I'm still at the point where I have to get myself there every day, and then come back, and then leave breadcrumbs with the meditation so I can always get back to that feeling.
I gotta ask, Sherry, you had a long near-death experience. You were gone for 90 minutes or so. I was gone for 15, and I remember that I felt one with everything in that realm or in that state, completely one with everything. So there was no other. Everything was connected and everything was one. And yet I was still me with a personality, but not really with an ego. And I think those are two different things. What was your experience like in terms of your identity and connection to oneness?
Yeah, that's such a great question. This is part of why even the topic of duality is so tricky for me, because my experience in the afterlife was very long. For me, it actually felt like lifetimes. And if I were to describe what that felt like to my body time-wise, it really felt like when I came back into my body after crossing over, it felt like I was gone for like 30, 50 years. So it was emotionally taxing for me. But that's how long it felt like I had crossed over. So to answer your question, yes. I mean, my gosh, the moment I crossed over, it was like all of my worries had just melted away in an instant. I felt light as a feather. It was like somebody took a backpack filled with boulders and just released it from my shoulders. And I will never forget that. I mean, that is enlightenment right there. Like, talk about lightening up, right? Lightening up the soul. the freedom. I mean, there's just no words to feel so connected to everything that exists, and to just in an instant be downloaded with the truth of who we are, our purpose, why we're here, and the true understanding of what God meant to me. There's no words for that experience. So to come back and have, a very intellectual conversation on duality is itself challenging for me, because I'm trying to make it practical. But in reality, that is our nature. So for me, I spend so much time, quote unquote, in the afterlife. I don't know any other reality at this point. Like, being back in my body, to me, this is the dream world. This is like, oh, we're here to play like this game of, everything is not all one and not all energy and not all, emanating from consciousness. Like, I've got to play this game. That's kind of what it feels like for me to be back here. But in crossing over, it's not even just that we're all one. It's that you recognize everything is of the same substance, right? Everything is we can attach these words to it, like consciousness or spirit or non-duality. But at the core, what connected everything for me was love. But it's not like romanticized love. It's not this relational love that we've been fed through media and movies and books of romance and this idealistic concept of what two people or two humans coming together should behave like, right? That's like this construct. But love, to me, is this, coming back to that connection word again. It is the connection to all that is, ever was and will be. I mean, it is the ether. It is the space in between. It is the nuance of life. It is life. there is no separation. For me, even crossing over, there was no separation between the afterlife and this world. And it's one of my biggest messages is, I think humanity is at a point where we're able to start maturing our conversation and moving beyond this, oh my gosh, like the soul doesn't die. And like, wow, you had a near-death experience. Like, wow, like that's what you experienced. Like, we're actually at a time where we need to spiritually mature and understand that the world is so much more than we've been told. And that the afterlife is not separate from this life. It is one big overlapping realm. Like, the earth is a realm. And everything has different densities and frequencies. And I guess from a near-death perspective, when you have that awareness already and you don't have to read it in a book or try to intellectualize it, you become fluid with that understanding. You become one with that creation itself. And so for me, I started operating in the world very differently. Even in business, just, Mitch, you were talking about business, even just the way I operate in business, in whether I'm helping startup companies or being on a board or partnering with institutions, everyone will pretty much confirm, like Sherry does not operate the same as everybody else. And I get away with it because you can still, at the end of the day, count on me. I will still get things done here and go operate the same. And what is different is that I see the world as one big energetic bubble with different density actually just get to play with. You know, you kind of push up against different densities and you get a little bit of a reaction, and that becomes life. It's not a black and white, this way is right, this way is wrong. That whole concept completely left my system after the near-death experience. So I don't know any other way anymore. I can't unknow or unsee the experience I had in the afterlife. So I don't know if that answers your question, David, but it's become a part of my way of being. Like that is my, Buddhism. That is my yoga, right? It's kind of a living meditation is how I would describe how I live my life right now. It just occurs in every interaction and everything I do. It's not just on my yoga mat. It is just a way of being as a result of crossing over.
Boy, the implications are that I think all of us are suffering from a form of spiritual insanity. Yeah, it's hard to put this into words because as soon as you do.
Okay, well, as somebody who's not crossed over then, should I be living my life the best I can from the highest self I can muster on a given day in a given situation? And should I be living it as a game? Should I be out exploring things? Obviously, you have to live within the confines of the world to some degree, but should I be letting my curiosity drive me?
Well,
I mean,
it's a very serious game of hide and seek.
What am I hiding from?
Oh, no, God is playing hide and seek.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
I like that. Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, again, that this is me. I think, to answer your question, yes, I believe that, I live my life through curiosity. And I think I talk about this a lot. When we were growing up, we heard this term, curiosity kills the cat, from a very young age. And whether you're conscious of it or not, there is something in the back of, your psyche that somehow is making you think that to live a curious life is somewhat dangerous or maybe irresponsible. Because honestly, why would we ask that question unless we were doubting that somehow to live a life driven by curiosity is somehow wrong? And I would ask you, Pat, like, is there a part of you that thinks that maybe there is something a little dangerous or wrong or somehow inappropriate or maybe immature, like that's what we have to kind of start asking ourselves.
Well, I've given up on maturity. I'm just not going to get there. That's a done deal. Wrong, no, but I find, for me in my life, I find myself on such a different path than most people. Some people would say the risks and things that I've taken are just nuts, but they're not to me because a lot of them build on competency. They're not just wild risks, and they've opened such incredible doors. David, I know you're familiar with this story. I'll make it really brief, but flying one day, I'm up around 7. I used to fly high performance sailplanes. Okay. Super aerodynamic airplanes, no engine. So it becomes almost a metaphor for finding invisible sources of lift, just like in your life, to go from point A to point B. And it's ultimately a racing sport or a distance sport. How far can you go? How fast can you go? Well, I wasn't going far or fast, but I was going high. And I'm up around 17,000 feet one day over Tahoe. So I have this beautiful blue emerald water underneath me, mountains still with a little bit of snow on them. And I bank the plane, and at the end of the wing is a winglet, and that winglet balances on a bubble of air. And on that bubble of air, my plane and I, rise up through the sky. And I got to a point where there was sunshine streaming through the canopy, warm sun, the beautiful lake below. And I don't know how long it lasted. I had no sense of time. Everything was one. It was like I entered a different dimension.
Yeah.
I am hungry to get back to that dimension again and again. Now, some people would say that's risk-seeking behavior. I don't think so. I was competent in my flying. What it was for me is a more visceral, curious, spiritual. It was such a cool place to be. I want to exist there. Does that make sense?
I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me. I was reflecting on the idea that I guess amongst the guests, I'm the only one that hasn't actually had a near-death experience.
No,
But
I haven't. I haven't either.
you haven't either. But one thing I did have, I've had several near-death business experiences, and they felt very, very similar to a real death. And that fear was just as real as a real death. But but I did have an experience once in Hong Kong in the jungles of Lantau Island, and where I had a very similar experience. Like it was like kind of like a moment where I was, for once and only once, in the Tao, where like 3.5 hours went by like a second. We were, we were walking around in this area. We had found some wild mushrooms, like wild mushrooms out there, and someone said, "Oh, you should try one of these." And I said, "Okay, I'll try one of these." And I got into a place where time stopped, where I absolutely felt I was communing with all the life around me. I got the cosmic joke, and it was a place that I feel like it's great that I was able to get there even once in my life. For one thing, I don't have to get there again. I don't necessarily think the point of being here is to feel that way. I think the whole point is to be here and to feel fully alive. I mean, everyone has their own belief about what the purpose of life is, the meaning of life. I don't necessarily think there's a meaning to it, but I think the utility of life is to feel alive, to be fully. And that's why I thought your comment on curiosity was apt, because curiosity is very much a state where you feel alive. You will never be curious if you're not fully engaged and alive. That's curiosity is kind of the bloom of on the rose of emotions in a way. It's right? Compassion, curiosity. These are the guiding principles, right? These are the two that you want to be finding in one's life. If one finds those things in their life, whatever else they're doing, they're on the right track. I'm pretty sure.
Talk about time a little bit. Time is coming up as a topic. What is time? And especially David and Sherry, you have a very different concept of time, I bet, than a lot of us.
Yeah, I see time as a function of mind, and objects and space are a function of perception. So when you have a non-dual state of consciousness, the whole architecture collapses into a singular point of now, and all reference to before and after disappear. Nonetheless, there is such richness and diversity and completion and wholeness in that flow of that pulsing, undulating, always stable and always manifesting moment. So it's rather abstract. Time and space are essential for a dual experience. And I want to highlight that I think duality is part of the inherent properties of experience. And that this is all the experience of the divine. And one can flow with this experience without getting caught up in the illusion of the experience. You know, to no longer attach your identity to the experience, but to let it flow. So even as I'm talking now, I can feel my body sitting on the ground. And I can observe that, and I can observe my thoughts as they're flowing, and I can observe my feelings. And I'm stepping back in successive layers from my experience to a state of just observing. And that non-dual state is marked by a perplexing equanimity, a neutrality, a peace. I am content. I need nothing. And that is a taste of the oneness, I think, that Sherry was referring to.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, for me, time was all notions of and understandings of time for me were just thrown out the window after my near-death experience. I came back screaming, "Oh my gosh, time is not what we were told." I remember, for me, I'll just start with sharing a little bit about in the afterlife. Time and space were very different concepts than what we are used to. And the way that played out for me was there were times I was just, at one point in my near-death experience, I'm underwater connecting with these beings. I'm surrounded by these beings. And at the end of my telepathic conversation with these beings, I had said to them, like, I was ready to cross over. Like, I love it here, guys. Like, I'm just ready to stay here. I don't need to go back into my body. And the beings, they weren't whisking me away off to where I wanted to go. And so I was getting a little impatient, a little frustrated, kind of like how David was saying, like, you're still yourself, like I was still me, but without like, this whole personality. Well, I would say I had a little bit of a personality, I guess, because I was kind of frustrated, but I remember my soul wanting to just move on, like deeper into the afterlife. And right before my life review, it was like space and time as I knew it just collapsed. Like the scenery around me, under the ocean, everything I knew went almost into like this whirlwind, like tornado type thing. And everything got like reshuffled into timelines that were, and this is part of my life review, there were timelines that were happening very, very slow, like painfully slow. I was experiencing timelines that were happening extremely fast. I was experiencing timelines that were happening parallel to one another. And so that just does not make sense, right, to this physical reality. But what I really got from my near-death experience is that, like I was saying earlier, that the earth is it's a realm. It's not this like hard rock and like we're just little like pegs on a like basketball. like I really got this understanding that it's almost like this holographic reality that we're living in. And so if things are holographic and I'm actually experiencing lifetimes parallel to one another, like what does that mean about time? Like how do you describe time then if the earth is not as solid as you think it is, if this reality is not as hard, solid as you think it is, but it's more of a realm and there's more of a spectrum to reality than our physical eyes are able to pick up on. So if there is a reality that maybe it's my subtle body is actually experiencing at the same time as this one, I mean, what does that say about, okay, 3:00, I've got a meeting? Like, where does that conversation fit in our understanding of time and space? And where is Sherry? Is Sherry completely here on Zoom? Or am I experiencing another parallel reality right now as I'm sitting here on camera? I mean, it really just, the concept of time to me just got completely blown wide open and shattered. And so I think that does play out for me back here in my body, in the physical. I mean, I struggled for a good 10 years to just, like, if I had to go to a meeting at 10 a.m., that was one of my biggest struggles. I could not get past my new understanding of time. I didn't, what do you mean 10 a.m.? I actually, for 10 years, just I struggled to get my physical body into that room on time. And that is solely because of, again, what I experienced about time, reality, space, in the afterlife. So it's, yeah, I mean, that doesn't really explain much about what time is, but what it does is it opens up a little bit of an avenue of curiosity. Like, can we actually get curious about our previous definition of time, our previous definition of what is this planet we're living on? You know, this near-death experiencer is saying this is not a rock solid reality. She's saying that the earth is a realm. Let me get curious about what that could possibly mean. Let me step outside my current understanding of reality and get curious about what that could possibly mean. Because one of the reasons we don't want to step outside that box and get curious is because what are the implications if there is some truth to that? If there is some nuance to life, this black and white view I had of reality, what if this person is even a fraction correct in saying the earth is actually made up of a realm? What implications does that have on your 10 a.m. meeting now on Tuesday? And that can be scary, you know? That can be scary. Yeah.
I got to ask Mitch, how does that impact how you operate in a business as a businessman? That sense of timing, that sense of trust, that sense of flow and presence.
Well, I mean, I was reflecting as Sherry was talking about. I mean, she experienced a non-material world, right? A world entirely of energy and vibrations and frequencies. And then she comes back here and she's having a hard time reintegrating with the material world, which is based on physical things, and time is a constraint. It's often, it's a resource, it's limited, so, I mean, as I was thinking about it, look, I think the one thing that's useful to point out is that in the past, I think a business person, since I'm coming from that point of view, I'm an entrepreneur and a business person. And from that world, it's a very practical world. It's a pragmatic world. It's about, things like, 10 o'clock meeting, beyond time, and so there's none of this talk. But if you look at who the really successful business people in the 21st century, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, even Bill Gates in his later years, they're all much more spiritual now. And all of these tech billionaires in Silicon Valley, and all the folks that follow them, like, Sam Harris and and Naval Ravikant, and and all of those folks. They're all looking at these issues. They're all trying to figure out how to engage their actual whole self and their whole world into their efforts, right? I mean, because as soon as an entrepreneur understands they have an advantage, they want to exploit that advantage and use it. Like my first thought if I ever had a near-death experience like Sherry and David, would I come back? Would I be like a bodhisattva? Would I be a totally different? Would I just, having seen all of that, would I understand the futility? Would I just stop wearing these clothes and start wearing robes or something? Like I have wondered, and then I've actually read quite a lot about enlightened beings and what they do when they're those kind of folks walking around. They say, no, you still have to cook and you still have to wash your clothes and everything. You just do it three inches off the ground, which I always thought was a nice way to think about it. But time, I'm at the point now where I can understand there's two very different views of time. Like I used to always believe time was an all day at the amusement park, that every person is brought into this world and you have all day to spend at the amusement park, however you want to spend it. But at the end of the day, when it's closing time, you're leaving the park. This is for sure. And this is how I thought the world was. And now I've kind of flipped it around where I think, no, that's actually not the case. First of all, how do we know that this is our only time here? Like, how do we know that there isn't a Buddhist reincarnation? Maybe not in the Western sense of reincarnation, but that some part of us is energy and never leaves, or learning new lessons and experiencing and growing and eventually becoming enlightened and never having it. We don't know that that's not the case. We don't know that it is. Like from here, unless you've had a near-death experience like you guys, all we know is what feels right and what we've been taught and what software modules we might take on. But the biggest of all is, how do we meld the material world, which includes time and space, with the energy world? And how do we make this a seamless, non-dual existence for ourselves, where we're not constantly struck by we're here, we're always here, and we understand it's like a suit we wear. Maybe we're wearing this suit in the material world when we need to get ready for that 10 a.m. meeting. And then maybe there's the time when we don't need to worry about time at all. Like when I was in the mountains of Lantau and watched butterflies around me stand still, and watch red ants not bite me, or mosquitoes stop biting me, because I was one with it all. That's time too. But maybe that's not time. Maybe that's the absence of time. I don't know.
You remind me of a key teaching, that as much as reality may be an illusion, we cannot see it as it actually is, right? We see it distorted through the apparatus of mind. It's an illusion in its appearance, but it's not an illusion in its process. So the 10 a.m. schedule is still important. You got to hit that meeting. And you got to respect the process of the non-dual manifestation, and work within that. It's a bit of a dance, right? Learning how to go with that flow, far beneath mind, right? That intuitive knowing, that allowing the not knowing, sitting with ambiguity, just sitting. I am forever going to be a student of this. My near-death experience just shows me I got a lot of growing up to do.
Yeah, I love what you said, Mitch and David, and yeah, I will definitely say it was a journey coming back into my body. I think that's a part of my story that I've only just begun to really share, is what did that integration period look like for me? And at times, I struggled with certain concepts, because they were just, this world was now foreign to me. But the process of integration for me, in that journey, I discovered this beautiful love and joy for the actual integration process, which I now refer to and understand as embodiment. Because let's face it, when I crossed over, while yeah, it's amazing and beautiful and expansive, and this understanding of reality and how the world works and the different realms is fascinating. What you don't have is the senses, the joy of really tapping into your senses, to be able to sit like David next to a tree, with his feet on the grass, and to experience divine love through service to others, through interpersonal relationships. I mean, these are the things that, yeah, I can talk about how amazing the afterlife is, how amazing the energetic world is. But what I had to discover was that, yeah, I do have to make peace with the fact that to be human is this understanding of what I learned about who I am in the afterlife, the spiritual side. But this human experience is about bringing that spiritual and grounding it here on the planet, in the physical. That is the human journey. So the integration process, the embodiment process, what we're all talking about is, how do we integrate this? Whether we are CEOs or founders or flying airplanes, and wanting more of that experience, more of that bliss, we're all talking about, how do we ground spirituality here on the planet? And for me, the yoga philosophy, I realized that's what I was doing. I was becoming this living embodiment of the yoga philosophy. I kind of discovered or rediscovered yoga. And as I was reading through the sutras and reading through the philosophy, I was like, oh, this is what I'm doing. And so yoga for me became a great philosophy for me to start explaining how I'm able to ground this existential experience of the afterlife right here on the planet and still experience that bliss that Pat's talking about. How do I get more of that bliss? Well, I will share with you that for the first time in my life, I am no longer having to come out of my body and take myself into the afterlife, into the remembrance of the afterlife, in order to find that bliss. I was actually able to find it. And here's that duality piece again. We think we have to go out and meditate upwards out into the ethers to experience that divine love. Well, through yoga and meditation, coming back into the breath, coming back into my body, and actually creating space in my inner world, space in my body, through clearing out unresolved emotions, allowing that process to unfold, I found that the spirit that I was leaving my body to try to experience, I was finding that divine love back in my body. The deeper I got into my body, the more my heart actually would break wide open, right? So it's this whole process of actually coming back into the body, deeply rooted in the body. Most of us, we're not trained to do this, when we were born. So we are walking around being like, oh, what's on this TV show? Or what's this? What's the news thing? So we're a little bit dissociated. I mean, let's face it, we're a little bit out of body. So for me, it wasn't until I discovered getting back deeper into the body in a way that was just not taught to me. but going deeper and deeper and deeper into the body, beyond that threshold where the body starts butting up against old patterning beliefs, like going deep beyond that is where I uncovered that divine love, but it was within me now. So I no longer had to actually leave my body and be dreaming of the afterlife, or Pat, as you're saying, dreaming of how do I get back to that feeling when I was flying, and that wind coming up against the wing. Well, that feeling can be uncovered by going deep within the physical body. So that's really what this journey I've discovered is all about. It's not so much about Sherry had this near-death experience. How do we all get this bliss? Let me take some, mushrooms and like do all these things. For me, I really uncovered it was about getting into the body, deeper into the body, that it wasn't so much about meditating out of my body. It was about actually finding a whole universe of the afterlife, but within me, within the very cells of my own body. As above, as without, as within, I mean, it's all a fractal reflection. Our inner worlds, our inner cells, our mitochondria, all of that is a reflection of crossing over into the cosmos. And I think the deeper you go into your spiritual awakening and you uncover that for yourself, so many of the questions about life and how to live life and why you're here get to be answered without having to dream of a near-death experience or even expand your mind so much. That the expansion of the mind will actually unfold as a natural biochemical process the deeper you go within your own body. So the curiosity doesn't have to be in the outer world. The curiosity gets to expand the deeper and more present I become within my own body. So that's a whole different, as a whole different reality right there.
Pat, I'm wondering, when's the last time you were flying?
It's been a while, and actually, in moving up to Idaho, there's an active soaring community up there that I want to look into. But in addition to the flying, I really resonate with what Sherry's saying, in that when I went through cancer, I found this deep joy that came from within me. I don't know where this came from, but it was just joy, and I have carried that with me. It doesn't go away, and it's such a profound feeling of connection and peace that I think your point about going within is so powerful, because I do think it's within that that's where we need to put all of our effort and queries, for at least in this life.
I think I'm not only going to go in, I'm going to go off. I have a low battery warning on my telephone.
David, thank you. Thank you for stopping on your trip to be a part of this conversation.